Okay, welcome everybody. This is, I believe, the last session of the day. Went by pretty quick, but we have a very important topic today, and speaking is Jordan Quintal. Presentation, WordPress Accessibility, the Fundamentals of Web Accessibility. Jordan is the president at the Genius Web Media Incorporated, and he has over 15 years of web development experience. He is a WordPress contributor and an active advocate for web and WordPress accessibility. Again, a very important aspect. I know when you create a product or service, such as we have with our product, accessibility is always something that we need to pay attention to. So if you're thinking about creating a product, this should be a very useful presentation. Jordan?
Thank you. So yes, again, I'm Jordan Quintal. I hail from Toronto, Canada. I own and operate the Genius.ca, the Genius Web Media. We're basically WordPress developers, website developers, and we deal with web accessibility. So today's topic is going to revolve around the fundamentals of web accessibility, and more importantly, making things accessible. So at the end of the day, or at the end of the presentation, I'm hoping that all of you go home and start to make things more accessible. So let's just to start, let's get a show of hands of how many people in here are developers. Okay, so a few. Users? Okay, a few. A little bit of everything. Okay, so accessibility is definitely a very growing and more up-and-coming kind of topic and trend. A lot of more governments, a lot of more cities are becoming aware of accessibility in terms of digital information and communications, where websites and any type of digital media is required to be accessible for all those that need it. Now, accessibility can cater to a wide range of people. It can cater to me, it can cater to you, it can cater to the future you. Like, how many people know somebody with a challenge? How many people would agree that as every day passes, we're getting older? How many people would agree that at any moment you can get into an accident? That's what accessibility caters to. Caters to the you now, caters to the you in the future, caters to the you that is crossing the street, bends down to tie his shoe, and gets hit by a car, knock on wood. That's who accessibility targets. It's not just for people with challenges, it's for everybody. Not only does it make people with disabilities' lives easier, it inevitably can make your lives easier, all around. And one great example is what's called the curb cut effect. I'm sure everyone knows what a curb cut is. You know, the little dips in the sidewalks that kind of dip into the streets, that kind of make it street level. That was initially intended for people with wheelchairs. Now think of all the people that now benefit from that. Elderly, people with wheelchairs, people with strollers, people with shopping carts, people on their bikes, people on their skateboards, etc., etc. That one initiative for people with wheelchairs inevitably spawned something that everyone loves, everyone uses. People don't even, when people see it, they don't even think that it was initially an accessibility standard. They just see the curve, they like it, they use it, and it kind of just fades from their mind. So and that's kind of the general idea around accessibility, is that not only are we building it for those with challenges, we're building it to benefit everybody. And so what I'm going to talk about is WordPress specifically. I'm going to talk about the importance of accessibility and some stats. And then I'm going to get into a few tools and a few plugins that will allow you to get started with accessibility, not the full-blown accessibility, which requires professional audit, requires a high degree of programming knowledge in accessibility. It requires different skills and whatnot. But what I'm going to show you is the fundamentals that will at least get you started, get you off the ground in terms of making more accessible products, more accessible websites, more accessible digital content. So what is web accessibility? Web accessibility means that people with disabilities can use the web. More specifically, web accessibility means that people with disabilities can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web. And more importantly, that they can contribute to the web. So not only do we want people with challenges to be able to use the web, we want them to contribute, whether it is building sites, whether it's building standards, building guidelines, whatever it is, that will help with web accessibility, that's kind of where it's important. So it's a very precise kind of definition. I've got some links there as well. I'm going to post this online so you don't have to like scramble to write links, but these are kind of the sources of information where you can get a good understanding of what web accessibility is in more detail. W3.org, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, the WAI, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative, more specifically, as well as WebAIM, which also has WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which I'm going to show you a little bit later. So this is in a nutshell what web accessibility is and how it can impact those that need it. So why is web accessibility so important? In the United States of America, the number of adults with hearing trouble, 37.6 million people. That's with hearing impairment, whether they're fully deaf, partially deaf, or anywhere in between, 37.6 million people in the United States as of 2012. So that number could obviously have changed, but it's probably pretty close. Number of adults with vision trouble, and that could go anywhere from color blindness, partial blindness, full-blown blindness, or any visual impairments, 20.6 million. Number of adults with any physical functioning difficulties, whether it be mobility, whether it be action-based, whether it be being able to get around, walk, whatever the case may be, 35.2 million, right? So this is in the millions. 20 to 30 million people in the United States alone, now we're not even talking about the world, we're talking about just in the US, have some form of disability or some form of challenge. Now obviously, these are stats based on ages between 18 and 65. Once you get into the ages over 65, these numbers drastically change because obviously with age comes more challenges, things happen, you lose sight, you lose hearing, you lose certain things, and that's just what happens with age. So keep in mind that these stats are based on ages 18 to 65. And then obviously, adults with at least one basic actions difficulty or complex activity limitation. So whether it be something small to something a little bit more complex, overall that's 73.5 million people. So it's a huge, huge demographic of people out there have significant challenges in life, whether it be physical disability, whether it be cognitive, whether it be intellectual, and everything in between. You know, the numbers speak for themselves. Like these are real stats, these are real people out there that have challenges, and that, to me, definitely kind of reinforces why accessibility in general is important, as well as web accessibility, because you know, the physical world obviously has limitations, but you know, the virtual world should have a lot less. We can manipulate it, we can change it, we can control the virtual world, more so that we can control the physical world. So making things more accessible online you know, should definitely be high priority. A lot of people have this notion that web accessibility is scary, it's hard, it's expensive, we don't understand it, we don't know why we need it, we don't really care for it. You know, we've heard about it, but it's on the bottom of our list. I've heard every excuse in the book. At the end of the day, it's really not all those things. If you put together a web accessibility development guidelines that you can implement into your development strategy, that eliminates time and cost because it's streamlined. You're doing it from the beginning. You're not building a site and then making it accessible. You're building an accessible site from the start. You've done the research, you understand the standards, you understand the code parameters, you understand the guidelines, and you build that into your development strategy so that you're not trying to waste time at the end or money making it accessible after the fact. You want to do it right off the bat. It should be number one in your development guidelines is accessibility, content and programming, which are two different things. So you have your website accessibility, which is in your HTML, etc. And then you have your content accessibility, which comes into play with images, PDFs, videos, audio, etc. So there's two sides of accessibility, both equally important and both required in order to make a website accessible. So if you, for instance, go the distance to make your HTML accessible, but you don't make your content accessible, your site is definitely not going to be considered accessible. So you want to have both ends, content as well as your structure and your website programming. So these are some stats from the US, very real and close to home. We're in the States, you guys all live in the States, this is real stuff. I'm from Canada, so the numbers are a bit different, but nonetheless, still impactful. So according to the World Report on Disability, more than 1 billion persons in the world have some form of disability. 1 billion, 1 billion. It's a huge number. That is a gigantic number. And that's growing with, because of generational factors, people getting older, etc. That number may start to increase. Nonetheless, it's equivalent to about 15% of the world's population. 15%. That's not a small number. That, to me, is extremely significant. It's a huge number, huge stat. That's why web accessibility is important. The 1 billion people today, and for the 1 billion people tomorrow, for the 1 billion people in 20 years from now, which some of you in this room may be part of that 1 billion. Knock on wood, hopefully not, but like I said, as people get older, things happen, tie your shoe, somebody hits you, you never know. You may end up with a challenge, you may end up being one of these 50%, you may not, nonetheless it's still important, it's still a significant number. So between 110 and 190 million people have very significant difficulties in functioning. So, out of the 1 billion, about 100 to 200 million people have severe difficulties in doing things, whether it be taking care of themselves, whether it be mobility, whether it be learning, whether it be clothing themselves, etc. They have significant difficulties, and thus accessibility is more impactful and more important for them. Again, with every slide I've included a bunch of links so you can actually see where I've got this info. I'm not making it up. I didn't pull numbers out of a hat. This is real stats. Those are the links that you can get more information. The World Report on Disability was created I believe, and I don't want to be quoted on this, but I believe the second draft of it was created in 2011. So these stats are based on this report from 2011. It was a long report. The last link there, the fact sheet, is a summarized version of it. I believe the whole report was like hundreds of pages. So the fact sheet is kind of a summarized version of that report. Very good read. You get a lot of good insight and a lot of good info on how many people are disabled, what different types of disabilities are out there, which is also important, as well as some other interesting facts about demographics. There was a couple of really good facts on education, where in certain countries, people with disabilities, they found that a lower percentage of people with disabilities actually attended schools, or regular schools, just because the countries couldn't facilitate them for whatever reason. So a lot of interesting stuff on how people with challenges have been impacted all around the world in different aspects of life. Really good read. I definitely encourage everyone that's interested in making things accessible to read it and understand it. Get a good feel of what's out there. Get a good feel of what people have studied and what people have come to conclusions and the results that they've found on different difficulties, different challenges, different disabilities all around the world. And also considering that different places in the world handle it differently, right? So here in North America, we've got standards, we've got policies in place. Some other countries, they don't. So, if you've got a challenge and they can't facilitate you, then you're SOL. Good luck with you, have a great life. So it's really interesting to see how different places of the world treat and facilitate those with challenges. Great read. I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at that. So Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0. Now these are very broad guidelines that the W3C organization had put together. And so these are fundamental guidelines that developers or content developers should use to understand how to create accessible media, accessible digital information, accessible communications. So WCAG 2.0 consists of 4 major principles. So it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, they're pretty broad, but they make a lot of sense. So the first principle is perceivable. Information and user interface components must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive. So they should be able to perceive what it is that's on the page, what it is that they're interacting with, what it is that they're looking at, quote unquote, because some people obviously with visual impairments aren't looking, but with assistive technologies, they, with screen readers, they can still perceive what's on that page using various methods. Principle 2 is operable, so being able to operate the site, navigate. How do I get from top to bottom? How do I get from one page to the next? What if I'm only limited to a keyboard? What if I have no hands? These are obviously different obstacles that people face when using computers or when dealing with websites. Some people can't use the standard keyboard and mouse. That's just the way life is for them. And so having alternate options for navigation or interface components in terms of being able to operate is very important. So a lot of, a very simple operable test is keyboard navigation. Unplug your mouse and try to navigate a site with nothing but your keyboard. If you have a difficult time, your site is not accessible, right? Because you can't get from top to bottom, you can't get from A to Z without a lot of trouble with getting stuck in places. You can get in, but you can't get out. A whole bunch of other things that can happen when you're trying to navigate with just the keyboard. It's a very simple, straightforward test, but it goes a long way, actually. Back to the first principle, perceivable, that has a lot to do with communication. Accessibility really has a lot to do with communication. All you're doing is you're taking something digital, you're taking some content, you're taking some communication, and you're communicating it differently. You're providing alternative ways to communicate the exact same content. Accessible sites are inherently well communicated. Sites that are not well communicated are inherently not accessible. Somebody that can't see a site, they have to rely on audio, let's say, for instance. So a screen reader is going to read out what's happening on that page. If what that screen reader is reading out doesn't make any sense or is not well communicated, then that person's going to have no idea what they're interacting with. They're not going to know where they are. They're not going to know what it is that they can do with it. They're not going to know where to go. And thus, that communication inevitably restricts the accessibility because it's just not concise. Even things like alt text for images. You want to think of how you would describe an image to somebody that can't see. That's communication. That's accessibility. You're painting a picture to somebody that would never be able to see that picture. So having that communication, link text as well. You want to be able to, if you have a link, you want to have a little descriptive text to say where it's going to take you, whether it's going to take you to an external link, whether it's going to open a new browser tab, whether it's going to take you to the top or the bottom of the page, if it's an anchor. You want to be able to tell somebody that, because if they can't see that, then they're never going to know. And if they click on a link and they don't know where they're going, then you've already lost them. That communication is gone. So getting back to the first principle of perceivable, that communication is definitely important. You want to be able to guide somebody through the site with whatever challenges they have, and it still makes sense. And obviously operable, like I said, is being able to operate the website via different methods, different tools, etc. These are some of the links again to some of the more intricate WCAG 2.0 stuff. It's a long read. There's a lot of different things that come into play, but it's all important. It's all relative. And like I said, with the curb cut effect, if you're making your site easier for those with challenges, you're inevitably making it easier for everyone in general. And you'll find that people will have a better, better interaction with your site, and will have better overall, I guess, an overall better feeling towards what they're looking at or what they're interacting with. So principle 3 is understandable. Information and the operation of user interface must be understandable. So again, it's communication, making things fluent. You know, in North America, we read things left to right, top to bottom. Don't build a website the opposite way, because somebody that has a visual impairment, they're not going to understand that. They're going to say, what am I looking at? What the hell is going on? This is not fluent. This is not something that I know. This is not something that I understand, and thus it becomes inaccessible. And then robustness. So you want your website to be able to, you want the content as well as your website to be robust enough to work on different platforms or using various assistive technologies. So user agents, which is a fancy word for browser. You know, web browsers. Firefox has a bunch of really awesome tools now that you can test web accessibility specifically on. And so Firefox's browser as a user agent has taken that step to ensuring that people can evaluate their sites and can improve their sites so that web accessibility is effective and efficient. Also, you know, assistive technologies like I said, screen readers or various modified keyboards or other devices that people can interact with in order to operate their computers or operate their websites. You want to make sure that you build your website or your digital information in such a way that these tools can connect and can be utilized as well. So those are the 4 major principles. Obviously, there's a lot more detail to them. I gave you just a brief summary. There's a lot more to them, but if you think about it logically, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like those 4 principles are, you know, key factors in a good website. You want people to know what they're looking at. You want people to be able to interact with it. You want people to understand it, and you want it to be compatible on all platforms. So if you think about it in a logical or general terms, those 4 principles are the basis of a good website. No matter if you don't consider web accessibility, you know, those are the 4 key components to a solid site. So it just comes down to logic. And again, it's taking existing information or taking anything digital and communicating it in alternative ways. Just finding new ways to get the information, the same information out there. You don't want to be presenting new information and consider that accessible. You want to take the same information, same interactivity, and present it in different ways. And that's really what it comes down to, and that's really what these guidelines are all about. So again, take a look at those links. There's a lot of juicy information on these guidelines, a lot of great information on fully understanding these guidelines and how they break down all the specifics. So now we're going to get into a little bit about WordPress theme accessibility. So I've covered the generalized web accessibility trend or focus, and now I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about WordPress. So these, theme accessibility is definitely important, and that comes into your structural website accessibility. When we're talking about programming, we're talking about HTML, or whatever script you use, that is what comes into play with theme accessibility. So again, a WordPress theme that is accessible, that does not have accessible content, is not an accessible website. So this is only one half of a fully accessible site. But it's a good start, and it's definitely good to know what accessible themes are and where you can find them. So first and foremost, those of you who may or may not know, WordPress.org this year has published guidelines for accessibility-ready themes. So that's now a tag. So a theme that wants to be considered accessibility ready goes through an audit and review by the WordPress Accessibility Group, or the WPA11Y group. Anyone interested in learning more about that group should definitely Google them, check them out. These are some of the keywords that you'll find in those guidelines. So again, images, having proper tags for images so that they communicate to those that can't see. Media. In some instances, you don't want media that just automatically starts or has no control. Somebody that may have, let's say, a cognitive disability may need a longer time to read or understand that media. Let's say a slider, for instance. Sliders, the big thing, everybody wants these cool sliders that move, that say different things, that fade in, fade out, move left, move right. Inherently that's inaccessible because somebody may need to have control over how quickly that is, or they may need to pause it so that they can read it and understand it. They may need to go back to the previous one so that they can understand the next one or the third one. So inevitably, time-based media needs to have some sort of control for those that need extra time in understanding them. So media is another key factor in your theme accessibility. Headings, so your H1, H2, H3. Effective heading use dictates that you should always use them in order. So if you're building a page and your main title is H1, don't use H3 as the next heading because it's not in order. People with different devices or different assistive technologies read and interpret that differently. So another thing about headings is you should always separate one heading, whether it be H1 or H2, for not for I guess descriptive purposes and not presentational. So what we have done in the past is we'll take like H1 using CSS, display it off screen, so you never see it. But to a screen reader, it's going to read that out. You are on the home page. You are going to blah, blah, blah. You put some descriptive text in there. So that when somebody with a screen reader that can't see gets to that page, the first thing it's going to read out is your H1. And your H1 should be for accessibility use and not so much for presentation. You can use other headings for that. But you always want to use one specifically for accessibility. I mean H1 because it's the first one in order is more than likely the choice that people use. But you definitely have some flexibility in that sense. But headings, H1, H2 comes down to screen readers and how they interpret that information. Link text, like I mentioned earlier, if you have a link, add a little description as to what that link is going to do. For those that may not be able to see or understand what it's going to do, you're going to tell them. That's important. So you're just adding more detail to your site. Another thing I should mention, and even with these few things, headings and link text, image, alt tags, they're also inherently extremely SEO friendly. You're adding tags, you're adding descriptive text to your site, which Google will inevitably crawl, and Google will index and rank, etc. So another key benefit to having an accessible theme or an accessible website also has very good SEO benefits as well. Just keep that in mind. You're not only building accessible sites, but you're inevitably building more SEO-friendly sites as well. And that's just kind of a side note. Keyboard navigation, like I mentioned, unplug your mouse. If any developers in here build websites, before you launch them, unplug your mouse. Test it with the keyboard. If you have a difficult time, somebody with a challenge is going to have an even more difficult time, or as equal a difficult time as you would. But at the end of the day, if you can't navigate it without a mouse, then somebody that is using perhaps a different device to operate the computers is going to have an equally difficult time. So definitely get into the habit of testing your sites without a mouse, just keyboard. Contrasts, that comes into color. So people that have partial or color blindness, you definitely don't want to have gray backgrounds with a slightly darker gray font. Because to somebody with color blindness or partial blindness, that's going to look all the same. They won't see it. want low contrast. You definitely want, you know, your blacks on your whites on your blacks, your blues on your reds, etc., etc. You want high color contrast, as much as you can, to be honest. And, you know, you see all these fancy new themes and all these great themes, and they have these thin fonts that are like light gray, and you're like, oh, that looks so cool. But to somebody with a visual impairment, all they see is a white fuzzy page that has no communication, has no context, and is inevitably inaccessible. So color contrast is a huge component. There's actually a lot of information on color contrasting, and there's a lot of publications on how to do it right. There's a lot of tools online that you can test your color contrasts. So if you're unsure as to how contrasting your site or your CSS is, run it through one of the contrast evaluation tools. It'll tell you, pass or fail. Plain as that. Skip links. For those of you that are not familiar with skip links, it is the function that will allow you to bypass your navigation and get to your content. And this is specifically with keyboard navigation. So let's say you enter a page and you start hitting the tab button and it starts going through your header, your navigation. Click to another page, and again, you have to tab through your navigation to get to your content. That can be very daunting. Let's say you have 20 links. Do you really want to force somebody to tab 20 times before they can get to your content on every page? No, you want to make it easier. Skip link does that. Skip link, when you enter a page and you hit tab, your first option is going to be skip to content. I can show you, actually. WordPress, I believe, as of 3.0 or higher, anytime you enter a page and you hit tab, your first option will always be your skip link. So I've entered the page, load, I'm hitting tab on my keyboard, skip to main content. So it's going to bypass that vertical menu, which is fabulous because that menu is huge. Imagine you forced somebody to tab through that menu every time they clicked on a new page. Nobody would use it, they would get frustrated and probably smash the computer to bits. So skip link is awesome. It's just a great tool. You can use it in different ways. If you've got a lengthy page and you want somebody to be able to get through it in a quick and efficient manner, dump a skip link. WordPress.org or self-hosted WordPress. They've done a lot in terms of accessibility, so they've gone the extra mile to ensure not only the front-end websites are accessible, but that WordPress as a tool is accessible. So now people with challenges can download WordPress, install it, and build sites. It's phenomenal. It's fantastic. Everyone can build a site now. Well, I mean, it's still getting there, but you know, they're making the effort. They're making the strides to ensure that the tool itself is accessible. So that's what a skip link is. So they have two skip links, right? Skip to content, skip to toolbar. So without that skip link, this is what I'd be doing every time. Every time I wanted to get to the content. Oh boy. I'm done. I quit. So skip link is huge and important. Definitely get into the habit of using skip links.
Is there a plugin for WordPress for skip links?
That's coming up. Great question. That is coming up. You guys are all excited. I like that.
Don't mean to jump ahead.
No, that's good. I'm glad you asked. So after skip links is forms, things like contact forms, consultation forms, requesting information forms. Anything that somebody has to fill in needs to be accessible. So if somebody can't necessarily see the form or see the fields, you want to add, again, like you would add to images, you want to add some descriptive text. Fill in your name here, fill in your email, etc., etc. Keyboard navigation comes into play, so you want to make sure people are able to tab through your form in a very efficient manner. You want to make sure that people can understand your form if they can't see it, and you know, things like error messages, etc. Those need to be accessible as well. So forms is definitely a major component in ensuring that your website is accessible. There's a lot of different things that you can look up on forms. A WAI ARIA, that's a specific program. It's kind of like HTML, but it's very structural. So what it does is you can set landmarks and roles for different areas of your site. And this is specifically for screen readers. So you can tell the screen reader what section you're in. You can sectionalize, I guess, your website in different ways. You can add roles to different areas of the site, so it can be it can have different functionality. It can have different perceptive, I suppose, elements to it, so that people with different devices or screen readers will have a better way of understanding your site altogether. So WAI, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative, ARIA, which I believe, I can't remember what it means now, but it's an acronym. So it's Accessibility RIA. One of these links will tell you, so look it up. Somebody can tell me what it means. But it's definitely, like I said, it's along the lines of HTML, but it's just a very structured way of kind of dividing and structuring your, he Googled it, fantastic.
Yeah. Accessible Rich Internet Application Suite.
Accessible Rich Internet Application.
Well, minus the S.
So it's a rich internet tool. It's a rich internet script. It allows you to extend the accessibility of your HTML or whatever it is you're using. Fairly new, very important. Definitely read up on that. Again, here are some links to what WordPress.org has published on guidelines for accessibility-ready themes. So if you're interested in building themes, I believe there's about a dozen right now. So it's a very small pool of developers actually building these. I think there's maybe like less than a handful of developers out there building these types of themes. It's a small pool, but it is growing. Genesis recently, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Genesis framework, they've recently released an accessibility-ready theme. So the bigger companies are jumping on board. So those of you that are developers, that are theme developers, read up on the guidelines, build accessibility-ready themes. Other things, the Codex also has some accessibility guidelines, so it goes into more technical detail on things that you should or shouldn't do. It gives you kind of some case uses and say, in this instance, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, and it kind of puts it all together in that way. So very, very, very good read. Again, any developers out there that build themes, you should definitely read up on this stuff because it's a small pool, but I think it's really going to start to take off. And so anyone that gets in on the ground floor will probably make a pretty good name for themselves in the WordPress world and in the accessibility world. So you'll be doing everybody a favor. Now some WordPress accessibility tools. WP Accessibility. This plugin helps with a variety of common accessibility problems in WordPress themes. This particular plugin you can download and install. It's going to give you a variety of settings. What it won't do is it won't alter any of your theme code. So if you write a theme from scratch or you buy a theme, this plugin is not going to go in and tweak all the things that are wrong with it. It's going to add some features. It's going to resolve a few issues, and it adds a few tools as well. So there's three pretty key things that you can basically download, plug into any WordPress site using any WordPress theme, and inevitably make it more accessible. Not fully accessible, like I mentioned. This is just a starting point for WordPress accessibility, but it does give you a lot of the important things that'll at least get you started with accessibility. Now you can, if you're a more advanced developer, you can go in and do a lot more with it in terms of your CSS styling and other modifications, but out of the box it comes with a lot of really cool settings. So there's where you can find it, wordpress.org/plugin/WP accessibility. I recommend everyone, any site builder or website developer should have this plugin installed and set up and activated and configured. Doesn't matter what site it is or for what client, even if they know about it or if they haven't asked for it, do it anyways. Tell them that you're making the world a better place, whether they like it or not. And that's that. That's, you know, sometimes we don't even tell them. We just put it in there and they don't know. They're not the wiser, but we've done our part and we've done our due diligence in trying to make the site more accessible. And obviously, the companies that have budgets for accessibility can go through the processes of getting a professional audit, which basically is like a group of developers and geeks in a room, and they go through every line of your code, and they tell you everything that's wrong with it. It's great. I mean, it may be a shot to the ego when you get back the report and it's not that good, but it's a great learning experience, and it'll really open your eyes to, you know, the things that you've done wrong and how you can improve your programming skills in general. Yes?
Something that we found that's been cheaper than hiring a firm to go through and, you know, report on everything. We use a tool called Bureau of International Accessibility, BOIA.org, and it goes through and tells you everything. And it's about $400 a year, which I think is a lot cheaper than spending thousands of dollars on a group of people that give you the exact same thing.
Well, no, it won't give you the exact same thing.
Well, I mean,
an automated process will never ever be able to duplicate somebody sitting down and critiquing your code line by line. It's going to go through it and it's going to evaluate. Yes, there are a lot of great tools out there that can do evaluation, but you know, it definitely doesn't compare, and that's just the honest truth. A lot of people think it does, but it really doesn't. A professional website audit, if you were a company or a corporation and your mandate was to have a fully accessible site, running it through an accessibility evaluation tool online isn't going to accomplish that. And that's just the reality of it. I mean, they're great tools. They're great for developers to go in and start making adjustments. But the real accessibility starts with professional audit. And then from there, you get a list of things that you need to improve on. And anyone that's intermediate to advanced developer, you know, for the most part, it's really straightforward stuff. It's not anything that you'd have to learn. It's just small details, like, you know, you tag this correctly, or structurally, this doesn't make sense, or you should have structured it this way, or you used your headings improperly, or whatever the case may be. It's all really straightforward stuff. It's not rocket science. It's not anything scary. It's not something that you'll look at and be like, what is this? You know, you'll look at it and you'll say, oh, this makes sense. And it may just be a list of very small things, but all very important to making it accessible for, obviously, people that have different challenges and people that use different tools. So there are a few evaluation tools, which I'm going to show you later on. You know, this kind of stuff is just a starting point. It's not, you know, doing these fundamentals that I show you won't allow you to go out there and brag that you're building accessible sites. It just won't. It's a starting point, and it's great. It's a great start. I encourage everyone to go these routes. But if, like I said, if your client is mandating that they need it to be accessible, whether it be for legal purposes or for legislative purposes, like in Ontario, in Canada, where I'm from, the AODA, or the Accessibility Organization, it's the, Accessibility of Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And basically, it was a legislation passed where top-tier government agencies have to have accessible websites and digital communications. Low-tier government agencies have to have the same thing. Public sector companies with over 50 employees are now, by legislation, obligated to have accessible websites. Now, as of this year, private sector companies with over 50 employees are mandated by legislation to have web accessible sites. The only problem with these particular guidelines is that they're not being enforced. So they're not giving rewards to those that do it, whether it comes into like tax breaks or some kind of rebate, or penalties for those that are not following it. So the guidelines have been in there, the legislations have been passed. The only fault with the AODA thus far is that it's not being enforced. So that's the next hurdle, you know, for making the legislation stick. You either gotta reward those that do it or penalize those that don't. So that's inevitably going to be the next step. But You know, if you're in a state or you're in a province and those legislations exist, you definitely have to go the extra mile. Doing this stuff isn't going to necessarily pass your guidelines. So the WP Accessibility plugin adds a few features. So the first thing it does is it throws in skip links. You don't have to program it anymore. You just check the box, hit save, now you've got skip links. Fabulous tool. Language and text direction attributes. So you want to be able to tell if somebody's using a screen reader, they should know what language the site's going to be in, like, right off the bat. It should be the first thing. It's English, French, Spanish, whatever. They should know that right off the bat. Keyboard focus. So keyboard focus, think of it as rollover or mouse over. When you hover over a link, something changes, color, background. Keyboard focus is the same thing. So if you remember back to my demonstration with the WordPress backend, when I was tabbing through the links, the text colors were changing, or the background colors were changing based on where I was and where I was navigating. So that's keyboard focus. Think of it as mouse rollovers, just for the keyboard. Basically the same premise. So it allows you to add those things. Similarly to adding rollovers in your CSS, it's going to allow you to set up your keyboard focuses, you put in your hexadecimal values, and you're done. It will add a toolbar for your color contrasts. So now you don't have to worry about that. It'll give you a tool where it will adjust the color contrast for you on the screen so that you know, the designers out there, they want to have their fancy colors and other pretty things, and sometimes it's just not accessible. So the toolbar will allow you to adjust that on screen, as well as large print. So a font resizer. So if you've got size 12 font, it's too hard to read, the font resizer will bump it up to 16, which is a more readable and visible font size. I mean, it's not aesthetically pretty to look at, but it's more accessible. And having this toolbar will allow you to change it. So it's like a zoom kind of feature where you can make your text bigger or smaller right on the page, right on the front end. And then also it adds long descriptions to your images. So like I said, tagging your images, adding descriptive communications to your images is also another feature that the tool adds. Some of the issues that it fixes, so target attributes, search page errors, tab index, strip title attributes, remove redundant title attributes from page lists, category lists, and archive menus, post titles. So, you know, a lot of posts at the bottom just say read more. That's not accessible. Read more what? What am I reading more of? What is this read more? That's so vague. So generally you want read more and then the post title. If your post is Google is awesome, read more about why Google is awesome. That would be a more accessible post title. And then other accessibility issues in the WordPress admin. So it does tweak a few things in the back end as well. And then obviously some accessibility tools, color contrasts, some CSS stuff. Again, plugin will help fix and add a bunch of these things, but it's not going to correct every problem, like I mentioned. It's a starting point, but it's not a full-blown accessibility solution. So web accessibility evaluation. I'm not going to read the whole definition. It's up there. Basically, it's a software or program that allows you to evaluate how well your website is accessible. The one more popular one is called Wave. I'm going to show you what Wave looks like. It's a really awesome tool. You plug in your URL. This is the genius.ca, which we built, I believe, 2 months ago. You plug in the URL, you hit the button Go. It's going to display the page on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, it's going to give you a legend of all the things you've done wrong, which are errors, which will be red. As you can see, there are 0. All the features that you've done well, your structural elements, your HTML5 and ARIA, like I mentioned earlier, and your contrast. So there's a few contrast things, a few contrast errors in there that we're working out. But overall, you know, we tried to go the extra mile and make it accessible. We use this tool, obviously, we haven't gone the extent of a full audit, but we've used this tool to improve some of the more common accessibility issues that people find. So your headings, like I mentioned, your image tags, so these little green thingies here, you know, you got your H1s, you know, all your tags and whatnot, all in place. So wave.webaim.org is a really great tool. There's a couple of other ones that I've listed. This is the more mainstream, more popular tool. So definitely get in the habit of evaluating your websites. Make sure that, you know, if the website project isn't mandatory or doesn't require specifically for it to be web accessible, or it's not part of the mandate, you can at least evaluate it and go the extra mile of making it accessible anyways, on a very basic and a very streamlined process. So definitely get in the habits of plugging in your site into that Wave program, seeing what it dishes out, and then adjusting your site accordingly. So to conclude, if you care about WordPress and the internet, you contribute to making WordPress a more accessible tool. And that's talking about the WordPress backend admin. So again, there's the WordPress accessibility group, which does nothing but test the WordPress backend. Previous versions, right now they're testing 4.1. 4.1 isn't even out yet. They're already testing on that level. I'm part of the group. Whether you're technical, whether you're a developer, whether you're non-technical, there's something for you to do, whether it be testing, whether it be creating patches, whether it be writing documentation, whether it be creating guidelines. There's a whole slew of things that people can contribute to the WordPress accessibility group. If you care about the quality of your work and about people in general, so you, me, the future you, the guy in the accident you, if you care about those people, then ensure that you develop your WordPress websites with web accessibility in mind. Even if it's not required, even if it's not part of the project, do it anyways. Whether your client likes it or not, whether they know about it or not, just do it. Like Nike, just do it. If you care about your local WordPress communities, then ensure that your meetup or WordCamp events are accessible as well. So not only should the front-end websites be accessible, not only should WordPress as a tool be accessible, WordPress as a community should also be accessible. A lot of what we're doing in Toronto this year is focused on event and venue accessibility, as well as development, WordPress development accessibility. So we're going the extra mile to make sure that WordCamp Toronto is fully accessible and inclusive. We've got a whole track, 2 days worth of tracks on web accessibility. A lot of great stuff, and that's pretty much our focus. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. Those are my, that's my Twitter handle, if anyone wants to tweet about what they've heard today, if anyone wants to comment, or if anyone has any questions, find me on Twitter, ask away, hashtag the event. I'll definitely get back to you, I'll answer all your questions. If you want to find me in the hallway and ask me questions, even better, tap me on the shoulder, smack me in the head, tap me to the ground. Get my attention however you can, I will answer your questions. Alternatively, I've got business cards for any of you that are interested in learning more about web accessibility or how you can get involved or how you can contribute. And I thank you all for sitting in on my time.